caricatures. Yes.
Maybe the same.
So what I was thinking of doing, and we can change that if we don't want, but I looked at the questions that we have discussed so far, and uh, uh, what I would like to do is just from after all the discussions, I would like the panel first to respond to 3 questions that are more or less the essence of the of what we discussed. But I feel the essence, and if there's an additional one, you can add something. And then maybe some of the people in the audience also might want to respond to the same questions. The questions being, could something like freedom exist? Could something like freedom exist, as in how we define it, right, so far? And how would such freedom come about? And what are the side effects of having no freedom, of having freedom or no freedom? So something. Does that sound reasonable to look at something like that? Is that fun or? Yeah. Good. Then we're. So, could something like freedom exist? One, how would such freedom come about? And what are the side effects of freedom? So, if there would be freedom, what would be the side effect? Whomever feels the calling, feels the spirit.
Whoever feels the spirit. Yeah, I mean, I want to try and stay simple and almost practical, just in terms of how it seems our conversation over the weekend has gone. That somehow, if something like freedom exists, if there's anything true we could say about it, it is that what we could say about freedom wouldn't be freedom. So it's again moving back to this notion of projecting a sense of or an idea of freedom and moving towards that is going to give us only the opposite of freedom. But that there may be some actuality to what freedom points to, but that coming to it requires an action that's almost negating what's not free versus moving towards what would be free. Something like that. And then I think in terms of what would it look like for, there's something about the consequence of freedom or some. And
the question is, could something like freedom exist?
Mm-hmm.
How would it come about?
Mm-hmm.
And what would be the side effect?
What would be the side effect is so I think again, it's more to speak practically, to use an example, just to go back to this idea of cooperation. I think it's like a useful way of just looking at possibilities. That if we have an idea of what cooperation is, and we attempt to apply that to our lives, inevitably that's going to come in conflict with what is occurring based on what we think should occur, or this whole thing is laid out. But if freedom is possible, it would be more like actually questioning what cooperation looks like actually, given who we are and what we are. That in asking an actual question, there's a freedom in the sense that there may be a kind of cooperation that we can't define now because we don't know what it actually looks like. So in asking a real question, there may be a kind of freedom, there may be a kind of way that we can then understand it in a completely different way. We may cooperate, we may be cooperating in a way that we don't even know yet how to comprehend. But in asking that kind of question, there's a freedom in asking. There's a quality of mind that has the freedom to ask a real question is something like approximating what this freedom may be like, is something like that. So, yeah.
You first. I like that. I think that when we ask, is freedom possible, I guess freedom is sort of suggesting that maybe there's also a prison. And freedom would be not being in that prison. So what might be a prison? And one possibility, we talked about space and time and physical objects as just an interface simulation that we use. And it's, most of us think of space-time as a prison. It's what we exist in. We can't get outside of it. Space-time has been there for 13.8 billion years, since the Big Bang. And the sun, moon, and stars have been there long before we are. This is what we're in. This is our prison. And most people would say the very idea of getting outside of space-time is completely nuts. Of course, you can't get outside of space and time. You were born in space and time. It's the stage in which the drama of life has played out. But then to recognize, well, freedom would be stepping out of space-time then. Recognizing that we're not little bit players on the stage of space-time. We create space-time. We're the authors. It turns it around. We're not in a jail of space-time. We've created space-time, and if we're in the jail, we've put ourselves in the jail and thrown out the key. And so to recognize that that's a jail of our own making, and we put ourselves in there, we can also take ourselves out. And so to recognize that space-time and matter are not the conditions in which we live, they're simulations that we use. And we're not stuck in the simulation. So maybe in that case, the freedom would be the ability to take the headset off. And if that were the case, that might make sense of when Krishnamurti talks about you either do it all at once or you don't. You either see it and you're free or you don't. And I often wonder, but it would make sense in this sense that you either recognize that, yes, this whole thing, it is a simulation, or you don't recognize it's a simulation. And once you really recognize it's a simulation, then you go, oh, so I'm not stuck in space-time. And in some sense, you're out. And you're either in or out. So in that sense, it would make sense of him saying it happens all at once or not. And then what would, if this is in the right direction, then what would be the consequence of that kind of freedom? Again, I don't know if this is the freedom that Krishnamurti was talking about, but if it was, what I've experienced, for me, by the way, it wasn't so much a spiritual journey as a geek journey, right? Just trying to have space, time, and matter being fundamental and it not working out, and so going, okay, let's try something else. Well, is it possible that maybe space, time, and matter, maybe there's just a simulation? Really crazy idea. Let's see where. So it's sort of a geeky, but eventually it seems to work out. It seems to make sense of the physics. And at some point, I went, "Wow, okay. Maybe I'm not just a little bit player in space-time. Maybe this just is a simulation." And I found, again, there is, I guess, a spiritual aspect to it, but I didn't come at it so much that way. I came at it as this is a technical problem I'm trying to solve. And this seems to be the only way I can solve the technical problem. But then it does have a personal impact. Wow, it does feel different. It really feels different to be the author of space-time rather than the prisoner of space-time. It really does feel different. And so I'm very interested in spiritual traditions and what they have to say about that. But so it doesn't mean, in this version of it, it doesn't mean that the freedom then destroys any sense of coherence or something like that. It's not a freedom into utter chaos, but it is a freedom in the sense that it gives me a different sense of myself than I ever had before, and even a different sense of what self might mean, because even this ego self now, which I used to take to be, of course, that's the whole extent of what I am, is now seen as well to be a symbol in the simulation. Which then, so where it leaves me right now is, okay, it's a symbol in the simulation, so I don't know what the heck I am. Right? But that's fun. I used to know what I am, now I don't. And it's sort of fun to be exploring what is me apart from just the space-time physical symbol that I used to think was me. And there's a geek part of me that says, okay, that's a neat new technical challenge, let's get some mathematics, let's go after it. But there's also the spiritual side, which says, how do I actually experience that and enjoy that on a that would be my thoughts.
And the side effect?
The side effect is, for me, again, it's not chaos. The side effect is not chaos. For me, there's a couple side effects. One, on the technical stuff, because I'm maybe at heart deeply a geek, I really love that this has opened up new ways of doing science. If space-time is fundamental and that's it, that limits the level of kinds of theories I might want to build. But as soon as I let go of space-time, okay, now there's a whole new area of work for me to do as a scientist. What is the nature of reality behind space and time? There's job security. There's more work to do. So there may be more grants to get. So it's sort of fun in that regard. It's fun also just as, the reason I'm a scientist is there's a kid in me that just is in awe of what's happening here and wants to know more. That's why I'm a scientist. So the kid in me is like a kid in the candy store saying, I just discovered a new whole wing of the candy store. Never been in there, but there's all sorts of chocolates and brownies and who knows what's in there. So I'm going to be in there exploring and seeing. So there's that aspect to it. And then I think there's also, another effect is it really is opening me up. I'm not just determined by the pattern of motions of atoms and nuclei and subatomic particles and so forth. That's just a story. It's an interesting story. It's a beautiful story. I love the story, but it's just a story. I'm not just the product of all these mindless chance interactions of particles. I'm something far more profound, and that opens up the door. What is that more profound thing? And why is it that in my simulation I see particles and things that look deterministic? So I'm not going to throw away the science. I just want to So for me, I guess the fun thing is it opens up things for me emotionally. It opens up new areas of exploration. It helps me to reintegrate the whole. I don't throw away my scientific framework. I put it in a new context. This is just an interface description. It's not the reality. I thought it was the reality. Now I literally get a whole new set of technical problems. How does the interface description work? How is it mapped to the reality? Why this? Are there other possible interface descriptions? Space-time is just perhaps one of an infinite number of different interfaces. Wow, that means a lot more job security, lots to explore out there. So for me, it's very freeing in a different sense. It's emotionally freeing. It's freeing intellectually, as a scientist, to open up all sorts of new directions of exploration for theories of what the nature of reality might be. All the while admitting that at any point I can make a mistake. Right.
Thanks. So when I now hear this question, does freedom exist? And the immediate response is either a yes or a no, and then neither of those seem satisfactory, because saying either a yes or a no seems to be an answer to, in some absolute, permanent, all-pervasive domain, whatever one means by the word freedom. But if I look at it as in every moment, as its own moment, not considering the next moment or the previous moment, and in what aspect. So if I ask in the moment and in what aspect, then the answer seems to be absolutely yes in certain moments, in certain aspects. And the answer seems to be absolutely no in certain other aspects, at least. And then it's not such a concrete yes or no or permanent thing anymore, this idea of freedom. I'm not sure how to express myself better than that right now. How does it come about? Again, for want of a better word, I don't have good words for it, but the yes part in certain moments, for certain aspects, the best word is some sort of attention or perception, not necessarily technically the way we use those words as qualifying it with whether it's an interpretation or whether it's direct or whether it's indirect. But I don't know what else to say other than observation or attention. I mean, all the words Krishnaji has used, but there might be a different meaning to them, different as in getting too technical about it might be losing some of that rather. But again, I'm not sure how to say it any better than attention. What are the side effects, the third question, of having either freedom or no freedom? In those moments where it's profoundly yes, and in those aspects where the answer is profoundly yes, then the words that come to mind right now are the side effect of no freedom in those moments and for those aspects where it's profoundly possible is that it just then implies a continuity, a link to all that has been and therefore all that will be, whereas the implication of freedom in those moments and for those particular aspects is, for want of a better term, again a sort of new beginning, where the word new is not new as in it's never existed before. The descriptor new for beginning is not a comparison with how it's been, but in that moment it's that break of continuity. That's what the word new is a descriptor of. Not new as in you've seen this color before, so if you're seeing the same color then it's not new. No, that's not what new is in this context. So that's sort of the best I can do right now. But this has been, for me, surprisingly an interesting experience these past few days. I mean, as some of us for years and years have been talking about these things, and some of that, at least maybe just intellectually, has certainly been, for some reason, speeded up a lot in the last few days. So thanks to everybody for that.
To the question if they think freedom exists, how it would come about, and what the side effects are.
Thank you. I would tend to put freedom in connection with choice. And it would seem to me that one way we could describe freedom, it's a description, is when a choice is made to best preserve an organism. And that would be whether it's an electron, proton, physical person, whatever, that's the freest choice. And then moving back from that, choices that don't operate to preserve the integrity of the organism or particle or whatever it is would be less free, moving back. So that's something I have thought of before for the discussion. The consequence of that, I think, is that if that is valid, if there is validity in that idea, then helping, again, from a female point of view, helping children to learn to be good choosers has a lot of implication in terms of their health as an organism and survival and Darwinian evolution ideas and so forth. So that. That I would, yeah. No, that's fine. I actually thought of this many years ago, coming from a Catholic tradition of is there free will, and that question, which many Catholic theologians have, batted back and forth and had different proofs and so forth for why there is free will or not free will. And to me, description of free will is a possible description that gets you out of that argument, is there free will or not, is that there's degrees of freedom based on choice that one makes. And that choice is related to freedom insofar as the choice is positive for the organism as opposed to destructive to the organism. So those choices that we make, or anything makes, protons, neutrons, when you talk about probability fields, should they make the choice not to become the hydrogen, oxygen, water molecule, they become something else, that I would argue is not a free choice. It's maybe there's an interference. And the same all the way up to human organisms, that if we make, and I think you can take it through nature too, that when choices are made in the integrity of the organism, they're the freest, would be. And I think that would go a little bit into what you're talking about with evolutionary biology and psychology, a little bit.
And the questions again were? Well, those are good questions because I could have some answers for them. So I feel good about that. And the freedom that I feel is that I don't feel restricted in the way I once did by having the demands of my inner ego to achieve or accomplish certain things that I valued. In terms of time and space, I feel more openness. I don't feel, and maybe because I'm retired now, I don't feel more harried. I feel less harried, but I don't feel the urgency of even needing to figure something out. I feel like in a space where I can be as I am without needing to change what I do. And unless I find something new to do, I don't feel compelled. I feel freedom in that. I can go to the gym and not feel guilty or that I have to leave early. Again, I owe that to retirement, but I appreciate that I could use it this way. Because I know that when I had time in the past, it was taken up with worry and concern and what I had to do, what I should do, what I needed to accomplish, what I need to show other people. And I feel a relief of that. And time does mean something different to me. I feel more in the here and now. I don't think a lot, except when I need to, about doing something tomorrow or the next day or in the next year, except I want to live every day. I feel centered in time as it is. Death doesn't frighten me anymore, because I feel like living in the now, and I hope this is not a rationalization, but death will just be another now. And I feel in all of that a lot of free space, and I think letting go of the sense of all of the needs and demands that my ego once consisted of has been key, and I'm glad of that. And seeing time as now and not the future seems important to me. So at this point, I feel like I have the opportunity to come from New Jersey to California to talk with you all, and it feels very good to me that I have the space and I could keep learning with you. So that's where I am. My pleasure.
Well, here we come to the sexual dimorphism again. Freedom for me actually is not having to choose. It's the lack of choice. Choice and making decisions in my life has never been easy. And I think it brings up, I don't know if it's a conflict in me or different parts of the brain sort of vying for what they what they think is the best direction. But I would say not having to choose. And what is the ramification of that? Although I don't know, I would guess living more in a flow rather than a more staccato kind of decision here, path here, decision here, path here. More of a flow. So that's that's my view of it. No, those are more trivial kinds of choices, that I make on the basis, but I mean choices in terms of things that I ponder for some period of time that are more substantial kinds of substantial kinds of directions that I take in my life, or that I believe that I'm taking in my life. I don't know how much of that is illusion anyway. I'm not even convinced how much my free will is illusion or real. So, but at least at the level of the ego that perceives itself in time, space, and its subsequent decisions mapping out a trajectory in life, some idea, perhaps very idealistic, of being able to flow in that without consciously at certain points having to make decisions, which have always been difficult for me. I don't know if that answers.
If I could make just a comment about that, because I think it's really an interesting point, in the sense that it's also not to say that choice has no place, but more that if there is a such thing as freedom, it's almost recognizing the activity of choice as the activity of choice is an action that itself is not a choice. Like there's freedom in it, recognizing the activity of choice as the activity of choice is an action in itself that's free, and it's not a choice. Like, to see that process of choosing and the fact that my choices and the chooser that chooses is also built. It's that whole process is what choice is. Not to say that the existence of that is the denial of freedom, but that the perception of the fact of that is a kind of free perception that's not based on choice. That somehow it's so then choosing may have its place. Yes, but it's not a matter of saying that a state of freedom is that in which a human being no longer has choice. It's more to see choice as what it is. It's a limited function. But we live in choice as though our choices give us our freedom to have our experience, which is a limited, so I just, somehow, I don't know how to unpack that more, but there's an interesting way in which it's
Anyone else wants to be free? It's for free. Okay, we say final words and then final words to close. Yeah.
Okay, well, me first. Okay. For me, what I looked forward in this experience was the dialogue between science and spirituality, and I'm very happy with it. I think that both science and spiritual traditions have touched a part of the elephant, and we're trying to figure out what the whole elephant is. And together we might be able to see more and more of that elephant. The dialogue, I think, is really critical between the two. Getting the raw insights that various sages have and people who are practicing spiritual traditions. Those raw insights are extremely valuable, in many cases hard-earned, some cases spontaneously enjoyed. And as a scientist, I love to then take all those insights and then ask can we weave together a coherent story in which those insights are genuine parts of the story, but they may actually help those of us who aren't as enlightened to actually see things that we wouldn't otherwise see, that we might benefit in a systematic way without having to actually have deep insights ourselves. Just like I get to use, there are some brilliant geniuses who figured out all sorts of stuff that leads to the iPhone. I can use it. I don't have to be that brilliant.
The Android might be better.
That's right. So just like there are a few geniuses that whose insights were absolutely critical for this, but the rest of us who aren't those kinds of geniuses can get to enjoy it and use it. I would love to distill the insights of spiritual geniuses or those who've been blessed with certain experiences, take them and repackage them in a form that we can all use and benefit from at our own levels. And that, I think, is where science and spirituality can work together. Insights together with then the hard-nosed point of view of science, where we say, okay, what do we really mean by that? How can we really be precise about that? What would that really predict? And then we get this nice refining, which I was enjoying just over lunch today. We were talking about some abstract concepts in spirituality, and we're going back and forth on what do we really mean by that. That's really useful on both sides. We both learn from that. So I think that this is just the beginning, that there's literally a new kind of rapprochement, but beyond a rapprochement, a cooperation between science and spirituality. Rapprochement is the wrong flavor of it. It's not like a truce. It's like a journey together, hand in hand, with the two insights that the two bring together to really try to come up with a way that we can systematically but genuinely address the biggest questions that are important to all of us. What are we? Why are we? What is good? And whence pain? How can we address those questions in really clear ways, taking the insights of the sages and the hard-nosed rigor of the scientists together to build an iPhone of spirituality? So.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have any closing thing, but just thank you to everybody who's here and not here, and just thank you very much.
Also the same, it's been just great to be able to do this, and I just think it's been really interesting and eye-opening, and what I'm left with is this sense that there are real questions we can ask, and learning how to ask those questions in a real way is really fascinating and important. And that seems to be like what I'm left with is there's some real value that can actually be very profound in our ability to just ask real questions and really ask them and see what we find out. That's very interesting. Yeah. So, and to come together and attempt to do that despite any and all of our agreements and disagreements and confusion, and that in itself is a kind of cooperation that we're sort of involved in, that we don't even know what it means yet, really. But the attempt in itself is really important. So to be a part of that is really interesting and fun, and yeah. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, a few things. The conference is for me and for some of us really like an end point, because we have been started preparing this maybe half a year ago, maybe even 3/4 of a year ago. and you know, first writing an outline and then starting to distribute, and then we had several conversations, Pratik and I, with Donald, and you know, reading some of Donald's material online, and then going back with Pratik, wrestling about what Krishnamurti said and disagreeing, and with Corey working on the presentation for the teachings. So, and I think it has been actually very fruitful to be able to articulate much more clearer also what I would say the Krishnamurti position on freedom, on suffering, and having it somehow, at least in my mind, so I don't know, in my mind, consistent with all the various things that have come up with about evolution and the limitations of perception. And I really think that the benefit of laying science and the findings of psychology, neuroscience, and all the other things that have come up next to our inquiry into ourselves, but also what Krishnamurti says, but maybe mostly into the inquiry of ourselves, is to somehow, there's so many ways that we can deceive ourselves, and that actually with science, and to somehow throw it out there, we can catch deception, right? Romantic notions, and I think romantic notions in the spiritual field are the biggest problems, because it's so easy to skip, and to somehow to so in this field to have the like even a concept like freedom, and Krishnamurti talking about freedom in every book 100 times. So I mean, that word comes up, and by reading it 100 times in every book, you might have the feeling, well, I know what he says about freedom, and to somehow go rigorously into it. So what does it mean? Are you free of fear? And then have a kind of, I would say, childish notion that, okay, there's then a human being that is not fear anymore. Now, what would that in the end mean, right? If some kind of zombie is left who goes around in the world without any emotion, and like a robot zombie, I don't know. So what would that's, I think it's very easy to make like simplifications about what could be meant that actually are romantically correct, but actually really weird and problematic, and also somehow impede us in our own search or in our own quest to try to understand ourselves and others. Because if we have the notion that we should be free of emotion at the end of this journey, then actually we might be aiming completely wrongly. So and that's, of course, Corey has pointed that out over and over again in these last 3 days, how actually if we have already in mind what we're looking for, then that's the direction we're searching, and then our motive itself is then limiting our search, right? So that's a really important thing, to know our motive, so then we know what we're searching for, the direction otherwise. So I feel that's really has helped me, and so the whole freedom thing, that it's not about, although Krishnamurti says total freedom of fear, most likely, in my understanding, he means something about the freedom of the continuity of what the mind is creating, right? What the brain is creating, what the self is creating. Is it continuity given to it or not? And then the second thing, which I felt was really interesting, because you have this physical domain and the psychological domain. And so I, at the end of this journey, have some more feeling of an understanding of where actually there's no separation between the physical and the psychological, and the realm where there is maybe a separation also in the continuity, that in the continuity realm the psychological might play a different role than the physical. You will still, hopefully, all not jump from that cliff, but step back. But we might be able to besides having a prejudice towards someone, being able to see that and act and relate anyway, besides we having the prejudice. And I feel that somehow where, in my view, freedom is. So it goes beyond choice also there, I feel. Although the action is choice, right? But yeah. So did I do it? Freedom. psychological. Yeah. And then also for me, and I feel we had a good balance in the last 3 days. It's like in the end, like what Don calls his geek interest, and I feel that's of course that's very male, and I'm also an engineer by I love technological things, and besides the the kind of order, and I can see I can always feel the excitement about building a model and seeing that it works in certain areas and certain areas doesn't work. So that's a great toy to play with. So I recognize that kind of fun, and at the same time also that so that it comes from a bigger context, because the bigger context is is that I don't feel this is just about each of us, our personal salvation or something, right? Because I think then we're missing the point. I mean, somehow this is a research into our humanity, which is about our humanity, and it's for the sake of humanity also. It's not just, okay, that we are better human beings or we profit from it. That somehow this has a relevance which is wider, and that's why from that point of view we have been looking at it. So those are my closing words. And thank you all, it was fun. And I'll see you next year. Just next week we have a gathering which is free for all. We do it at the other campus, at the school campus. There's lots going on. We have about 10 or 12 speakers and other things happening. It's free, and everybody's very welcome to come and join. And also the people online, they're come over to Ojai. That's it, huh? And thanks to Francisco and Henry for doing the audio, and Bruce for doing the filming. I mean, I don't know if I could see their faces, and they were sweating when you hear a glitch on the speaker or something, and they were nervously running around. And Red, of course, outside, but he might see it online. Yeah. So thank you all.